In 1969, a genius built a car that broke every rule of physics. It was so fast, it lapped the entire field. So advanced, it scared Detroit's top executives. And so dangerous to the establishment, they ensured it would never cross the finish line. This is not a story about a race. This is a story about a conspiracy. What if the real reason it failed wasn't mechanical, but corporate? Daytona, 1969. Under the sweltering southern sun, a black and gold Ford Mustang Boss 302 sat in Smokey Yunick's garage. A machine too fast, too clever, too dangerous for the world it was born into. Built to break NASCAR, it defied the rule book and Detroit's corporate leash. But what unfolded at Talladega wasn't just racing history. It was defiance, sabotage, and betrayal. This is the explosive truth they tried to hide forever. The call of Talladega. The summer of 1969 burned hotter than any Daytona July. American racing was at war, not with foreign invaders, but with itself. The Trans Am series was booming, Ford and Chevrolet locked in a bitter duel for supremacy. Detroit's finest minds were rewriting the laws of speed, engineering engines that roared like wild beasts and devoured asphalt like starving predators. And in the middle of that storm stood Henry "Smokey" Yunick, a man with a wicked grin, a head full of impossible ideas, and a workshop where rules came to die. Smokey didn't build cars to compete. He built them to dominate. By the late 60s, his name had already become folklore, whispered in paddocks, cursed in boardrooms, and etched into the nightmares of NASCAR inspectors. He'd broken records, bent rules until they screamed, and walked away smiling every time. But in 1969, he was offered a weapon unlike anything he'd ever touched, the brand new Ford Mustang Boss 302. This wasn't just another muscle car. Built by Kar Kraft for Ford's Trans Am assault, it was a razor-edged machine designed to shred corners, dance on high revs, and bleed blue oval pride. But Smokey Yunick didn't want to dance. He wanted to fly. When Ford handed him the keys to one specially prepared Boss 302, dressed in his trademark black and gold best damn garage in town livery, Smokey didn't see a Trans Am road racer. He saw something else entirely, a weapon meant for war on the big ovals, where speed ruled and courage separated champions from ghosts. And there was no battlefield deadlier than Talladega superspeed, building a monster. Talladega was a different kind of beast, a 2.5-mile coliseum built for speed, where NASCAR demanded machines that could endure relentless high banks, punishing G-forces, and straightaways long enough to test the limits of human nerve. The factory-prepared Kar Kraft Boss 302 wasn't built for that. It was a Trans Am weapon, delicate and nimble, optimized for winding corners and short sprints. But Smokey Yunick was no ordinary mechanic. He looked at the Mustang's bones, its high-revving engine, its aggressive stance, its untapped potential, and saw something the designers couldn't, a platform for destruction. The first thing Smokey did was strip away the lightweight magnesium components used in Trans Am. Beautiful? Yes. Durable? Number. Talladega demanded steel, stronger, heavier, hungrier. He swapped the fragile magnesium racing wheels for steel wheels carved with cutout vents, a clever trick to cool the disc brakes without losing strength. NASCAR had banned magnesium anyway, but Smokey didn't care about rules. He cared about winning. Then came the engine. The stock Boss 302 carried twin Holley Dominator carburetors designed for road racing bursts of power. But NASCAR's regulations forced Smokey to replace them with a single Dominator, a restriction he turned into an opportunity. He reworked the fuel delivery, squeezed efficiency where none existed, and tuned the 302 cubic inch heart to scream past 8,000 RPM on Talladega's high banks. The engine lived at the ragged edge of physics, spinning so violently that piston skirts blurred and valve springs prayed for mercy. But power wasn't enough. Smokey understood that at 177 miles per hour, the tiniest detail could separate victory from disaster. So he re-engineered the suspension, ripping out Kar Kraft's magnesium arms and replacing them with heavy-duty NASCAR-spec steel components designed to absorb the stress of left-turn loads lap after lap. The car hunkered lower, clawed harder, and became stable at speeds where most Mustangs shook themselves apart. Then came Smokey's signature innovation, a stroke of mad genius disguised as necessity. The stock Mustang's steering box lived inside the frame rails, eating up precious real estate. Smokey wanted room for headers so massive they could swallow a man's fist. So he did what nobody else dared. He raided an Australian Ford Falcon, yanked its steering components, and mounted the steering box and idler arm outside the frame rails. That single decision changed everything. Now free of obstruction, Smokey built a set of bundle of snakes, custom headers, twisting oversized tubes that turned exhaust flow into raw horsepower. The Mustang's 302 breathed like a predator unleashed, howling down Talladega's straights with a voice unlike any other car on the grid. But even this wasn't enough for Smokey Yunick. He wanted perfection, and perfection required bending reality. He crafted a reverse rotation starter, threading it through the firewall into a custom bell housing, clearing even more space for the gargantuan headers. It was an absurd solution, a detail so outlandish that no sane engineer would have considered it. But that was Smokey's gift, seeing possibilities where others saw dead ends. And when he was finished, the black and gold Boss 302 wasn't just a race car anymore. It was a missile. The paddocks whispered. Mechanics walked past his garage pretending not to stare. Rivals peeked inside only to shake their heads in disbelief. Nobody built cars like Smokey Yunick. Nobody dared. The stage was set. Talladega Superspeedway, a cathedral of speed carved into Alabama soil, was about to host its first-ever race. The grandstand stretched into the horizon, a monument to American ambition. Engines thundered in the distance, the air smelled of burning fuel and hot rubber, and somewhere inside the noise, Smokey Yunick lit a cigarette and smiled. Because he knew something the world didn't. This car, this machine, was faster than anything they'd ever seen. And when race day came, the legend would begin. Talladega, a shot at immortality. September 1969. The Alabama sun baked the freshly paved asphalt of Talladega Superspeedway, a track unlike anything America had ever seen. Its massive 33-degree banking rose like walls around the oval, and its straightaways stretched so far they looked endless. It was a cathedral of speed, carved into red clay, built for one purpose, to crown gods among men. But behind the grandstands, whispers filled the paddock. This wasn't just another race. The big names of NASCAR, Richard Petty, David Pearson, Cale Yarborough, had boycotted Talladega. Word had spread that the track surface chewed through tires like paper, turning 180 miles per hour into a game of Russian roulette. The Grand National stars packed up and left, refusing to risk their lives on an unproven superspeedway. But Smokey Yunick stayed, because while the legends walked away, he smelled opportunity. If the giants refused to step into the arena, the field belonged to the bold. And Smokey Yunick had brought a weapon unlike anything else on pit road. His black and gold Ford Mustang Boss 302, tuned to perfection, rebuilt for NASCAR's brutal demands, and hungry for blood. And in the driver's seat sat Bunky Blackburn, a man with nerves of steel and the trust to pilot Smokey's monster where others feared to tread. The car sat low, menacing, and coiled like a predator ready to strike. The headers glinted under the sun, the reverse rotation starter hidden deep in its belly, the custom Falcon steering mods invisible to the untrained eye. No other machine on the grid looked like it, and no other machine sounded like it either. When the engine fired, the Boss 302 didn't purr. It howled. The sound rolled across the infield like thunder. Rival teams glanced over, brows furrowed. This wasn't a Trans Am Mustang anymore. It was a missile disguised as a pony car, and everybody knew it. Pole position, the proof of genius, qualifying day. The air was hot, the tension thicker than the humidity. Bunky strapped in, helmet clamped, hands locked on the suede wheel. Smokey leaned into the window, cigarette between his fingers, and muttered something only Bunky could hear, a final instruction, a whispered challenge. The green flag dropped. The black and gold Mustang screamed onto the banking, tearing through Talladega's curves like a predator unchained. The tack needle danced, the exhaust roared, and every last ounce of Smokey's engineering wizardry came alive. The time came over the radio. Then silence. Then another time, another gasp. 177 miles per hour. The pit lane erupted. Smokey's Mustang had set pole position nearly 5 miles per hour faster than the next closest qualifier. On a track where tire failures scared champions into retreat, Smokey's creation gripped the asphalt like it was born for this battlefield. Smokey leaned against the pit wall, expression unreadable, smoke curling from his cigarette. For him, pole position wasn't victory. It was confirmation. His machine wasn't just fast, it was untouchable. The start, a black and gold missile. Race day dawned with a nervous energy. The boycotts meant unfamiliar names filled the grid, journeymen, rookies, dreamers who'd never sniffed the spotlight. But in garage stalls and press tents, one name was everywhere: Smokey Yunick. When the green flag waved, Bunky Blackburn stomped the throttle and unleashed chaos. The Boss 302 launched like a bullet leaving the barrel, eating up pavement and spitting out air. The headers sang a savage note at 8,000 RPM, the car carving through corners with a precision that seemed unnatural. Lap after lap, Smokey's Mustang didn't just lead, it destroyed. Within the first stretch, Bunky opened up a gap. 10 laps later, he'd put half the field a lap down. 20 laps later, he'd lapped the entire grid. The pit lane buzzed. Crew chiefs stared at their stopwatches, unable to believe the numbers. Smokey's car wasn't just winning, it was rewriting the physics of Talladega. Every detail, every vented steel wheel, every Falcon steering component, every hand-bent exhaust tube was working in perfect harmony. Smokey Yunick had done what Detroit engineers said couldn't be done. He'd built a small block Mustang capable of obliterating NASCAR's ovals, the whisper of doom. And then, somewhere around lap 60, the sound changed. Not enough for the untrained ear to notice, but Smokey heard it. Amid the deafening roar of 8,000 RPMs, he caught a subtle tick, a vibration in the frequency only a man who'd lived his life elbow-deep in engines would recognize. He leaned forward, squinting at Bunky's Mustang as it thundered past the pits, its gold accents glinting in the Alabama sun. Something was wrong. Lap 72. The tick grew louder. Inside the car, Bunky felt it, a faint shudder through the wheel, a change in balance, the sense that one of the Mustang's lungs was faltering. He radioed in. Smokey's voice cracked back through the static. "Keep it steady. Don't over-rev her. We're close, but physics doesn't bargain. Lap 80. The vibration became a hammer. Bunky lifted slightly, nursing the car, but the Boss 302 was already bleeding power. The other cars, once ants in the mirrors, began closing, sensing weakness. Then, without warning, the sound went silent. The engine coughed, the car slowed, and in that cruel instant, the dream shattered. Rocker arm failure, the fall of a titan. A rocker arm, no bigger than a man's hand, had snapped under the relentless stress of Smokey's furious tuning. That tiny piece of steel, beaten to death by high RPMs and brutal Talladega G-forces, had ended the black and gold Mustang's dominance. Bunky coasted down pit road, helmet resting against the seatback, the deafening howl of the Mustang replaced by the hollow silence of heartbreak. Smokey stood by the wall, arms crossed, cigarette burning down to nothing, watching his masterpiece crawl to a stop. For one brief, shining moment, his creation had been untouchable. A machine from the future disguised as a '69 Boss 302. And then, just like that, it was over. The paddock didn't cheer. They whispered. Rival crews, journalists, and Ford insiders all stared at the silent car, some with relief, others with awe. Everyone knew they'd just witnessed something historic, a glimpse of what could have been, had physics granted Smokey Yunick a few more laps. Smokey said nothing as the crew pushed the car behind the pit wall. He just flicked his cigarette, exhaled slowly, and walked away without looking back. The legend begins. The 1969 Talladega Grand Touring race ended without Smokey Yunick's victory, but it didn't matter. because in the minds of everyone who saw it, they'd witnessed a car that defied reason. A Mustang engineered not by committee, but by one man's refusal to accept limits. The black and gold Boss 302 had lapped the field, humiliated the competition, and proved that Smokey Yunick's mind operated on a plane far beyond Detroit's assembly lines. And yet, beneath the awe, another story was already taking shape. Whispers in Ford's boardrooms, quiet phone calls from NASCAR officials, skeptical engineers muttering about Smokey's tricks. Even before the wrenches stopped turning, forces were aligning, forces far more powerful than a broken rocker arm. Smokey Yunick had built something too good, something that didn't just threaten competitors, it threatened entire industries. And when that happens in American racing history, the story never ends on the track. The Suppression game. Talladega was supposed to be Smokey Yunick's coronation, the day his name carved itself into NASCAR history. But when the black and gold Boss 302 Mustang limped into the garage, silent and beaten, something shifted. The headlines the next morning didn't celebrate his engineering genius. Instead, the whispers began. In the corporate towers of Dearborn, behind glass walls and polished conference tables, Ford executives held quiet meetings. Smokey's car had embarrassed every other factory-backed team, Shelby, Bud Moore, Holman Moody. He had lapped the field in a car Detroit didn't fully control. To the suits, that wasn't innovation. That was chaos. NASCAR wasn't thrilled either. Bill France Sr. had built Talladega to showcase his drivers, his rules, and his control over the sport. Smokey Yunick's machine, tuned beyond any known boundary, represented something dangerous, a future where one man's ingenuity could overpower an entire industry. That could not be allowed. Behind closed doors, phone calls started. Regulations were reviewed. Testing data lost. Opportunities quietly withdrawn. Smokey's offers to return with an even faster Mustang were met with silence. The message was clear, though never spoken aloud. You've proven your point, Smokey. Now sit down. But Smokey Yunick had never been the kind of man to sit quietly. An unforgiving industry. Ford engineers had studied the Boss 302 after Talladega. They'd stripped it bare, measuring every vent, every exhaust bend, every Falcon-sourced steering component. What they found terrified them, not because it was illegal, but because it wasn't. Smokey had stayed within the rulebook but destroyed the curve. If this car became the template, every team in NASCAR would need to start over. Costs would explode. Development timelines would stretch years. Detroit's carefully balanced budgets would bleed. So Ford made its move. Funding for experimental GT racing was scaled back. Focus shifted toward factory-approved builds designed for marketing, not dominance. Smokey's unique combination of Falcon steering geometry and his bundle of snakes exhaust headers was never implemented in any factory racing program. The black and gold Mustang? Shelved, forgotten, erased from the spotlight before its time. Smokey returned to Daytona, head down, cigarette in hand, knowing exactly what had happened, but refusing to give them the satisfaction of saying it aloud. Ghosts in black and gold. Years passed. Decades even. NASCAR evolved. The Boss 302 legend faded into barroom stories and grainy photos in dusty garages. But for those who'd been there that September day in 1969, Talladega was unforgettable. And Smokey? He never forgave. He'd tell anyone who listened, and plenty who wouldn't, that Detroit and NASCAR didn't want one man's genius disrupting their billion-dollar ecosystem. His Boss 302 had proven too much, too soon. And so, like so many of Smokey Yunick's miracles, it was locked away, buried under corporate silence and rewritten history. But legends don't stay buried forever. Somewhere along the way, enthusiasts began to dig. Vintage racing historians unearthed photos, tuning notes, fragments of specifications. One surviving Smokey Yunick Boss 302 was finally restored. The black and gold livery gleaming under the lights, looking every bit the predator it once was. It occasionally appears at vintage racing events, a living artifact from a forgotten chapter of motorsport rebellion. Yet, even today, questions linger. Why did Ford greenlight a one-off Mustang so radical, only to abandon it after one race? Why did internal documents from Dearborn on the Talladega project quietly disappear from Ford's archives? Why were NASCAR's regulations rewritten the following season to quietly outlaw Smokey's steering modifications without ever naming him? The answers aren't in the headlines. They're buried in confidential memos, private phone calls, and agreements made far from the roar of the track. A legend reborn. In recent years, engineers studying Smokey's archived blueprints noticed something striking. His modifications weren't just creative. They were decades ahead of their time. Ventilated steel brake wheels, now standard in performance racing, reverse rotation starters for packaging efficiency, adopted in endurance racing, Falcon-style steering relocations to free exhaust paths, commonplace in Formula One exhaust routing. Smokey Yunick had designed in 1969 what racing engineers wouldn't discover until the late 1980s and 1990s. His black and gold Boss 302 wasn't just a Mustang. It was a prototype for the future one Detroit wasn't ready to unleash. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they buried it. Today, the restored Smokey Yunick Boss 302 sits behind glass, silent, untouchable, and frozen in time. To casual fans, it's just a beautiful relic of a bygone era. But to those who know the story, it represents something far bigger. A moment when one man with a wrench came within inches of rewriting racing history. But here's where it gets stranger. Recently, collectors and historians have uncovered fragments of Smokey's original Talladega notes, handwritten schematics, tuning data, and designs never used on the car. Among them are references to an aero package and a power recovery system, decades ahead of its time. Technology so radical it could have pushed his Mustang into uncharted speeds. Some say the surviving car hides modifications Ford never acknowledged. Some whisper there was a second Boss 302, a fully completed sister car, that disappeared before Talladega ever happened. And deep in Daytona, in the shadow of where his garage once stood, old-timers still talk about a locked storage unit Smokey kept until his death, one that no one has opened since. Inside, they say, lies the truth about the car that was too fast to be allowed to win. The question now is simple and terrifying. Did Detroit bury Smokey Yunick's future? Or is it still out there waiting to be unleashed? This is Paul from Rare Car Stories. Catch you next time.